Hello, and welcome back to the Economics of Everything. This week's topic is part 3 of the coffee series, the economic importance of coffee. Let's get right into it. The production of coffee is a very particular one regarding both the process and the region. Coffee best grows between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. This creates 3 distinct growing regions: Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Coffee beans are actually the seeds of a cherry-looking fruit. To remove the skin and the pulp surrounding the seed, there are 2 methods. The first method is known as the dry method, and this involves cleaning and sorting the fruit and then letting them dry in the sun until the moisture content has fallen to 11%. The wet method involves the use of machinery to remove the bulk of the cherry and pulp. After the skin and pulp has been removed, the beans are placed in a fermentation tank where the final layers are loosened by enzymes. For those who prefer a decaf or decaffeinated coffee, the beans have to go through one more step before they are roasted. There are many decaffeination processes. The most common one is known as the supercritical carbon dioxide extraction. The moist beans are contacted with large quantities of carbon dioxide at a high pressure and temperature. This extracts 97% of the caffeine. There are other methods that include organic solvents, triglycerides, and green coffee extract. Now comes the roasting, where the beans lose the remaining moisture and gain that dark complexion they are so known for. Traditionally, coffee is roasted by the manufacturer in one of 4 degrees: light, medium, medium to dark, and dark. While some coffee is left intact after roasting so that the consumer or seller can grind them, most coffee is sold ground. The degree of fineness matters too. If the beans are still coarse, the water cannot pick up much flavor. If the beans are too fine, the water filters very slowly and might also retain particles at the bottom. Coffee is produced in several countries along the equator. The top 15 countries that produce coffee, in the order, are Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia, Ethiopia, Honduras, India, Uganda, Mexico, Peru, Guatemala, Nicaragua, China, the Ivory Coast, and Costa Rica. The coffee produced comes usually in 2 types: coffee Arabica and coffee Robusta. Coffee Arabica is produced in higher amounts, has a better taste, costs more, but is more vulnerable to coffee plant diseases such as coffee leaf rust, coffee berry disease, and more. Coffee Robusta is produced in lower amounts, doesn't taste as good as Arabica. It is cheaper, but, as the name suggests, it is robust and not as vulnerable to diseases and pests. Countries that produce coffee and countries that export coffee are not necessarily the same. While countries like Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia are still in the top 5 coffee exporting countries, there are some countries that are quite unexpected. This image shows the top 23 countries that export coffee and the percent of total global exports they own. Countries like Germany and Switzerland are surprisingly in the top 5 countries that export coffee without having a single coffee farm on their own soil. Brazil is the obvious leader of coffee exports, totaling 14.1% of total coffee exports. Coffee does remain an important export in Brazil, but its importance has declined in the last 50 years. Coffee exports as a percentage of total exports peaked at 63.9% in 1950. This began to decline in the 1960s when other export-heavy sectors expanded. By 2006, coffee export was down to 2.5% of Brazil's total exports. Brazil's top importers were Germany at 20.1%, the US at 19.2%, and Japan at 10.5%. Coffee has been an integral part of Brazil's economic history. To learn more, Watch the video on Brazil's coffee history. Vietnam comes in second and exports 10.5% to the world. Coffee only really picked up speed in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. After the war, the coffee industry was nationalized and people were resettled to work on collective farms. The Doi Moi reforms of 1986 reinstated the right to privately owned enterprises and marked the dynamic rise of coffee production in Vietnam. Between 1995 and 1999, in a span of 4 years, coffee production in Vietnam nearly tripled and has continued to increase since then, being second only to Brazil. In 2017, coffee made up 1.4% of Vietnamese exports by value. 97% of the coffee that Vietnam exports is Robusta. However, fluctuations in coffee prices have taken their toll on Vietnam. In 2003 and 2004, a global harvest, a good harvest, not 29.5 million bags from 17 million bags the previous year, added to the global supply of beans and plummeted coffee prices. 56 of the 127 local coffee export firms ceased trading due to their inability to repay loans. Due to this, 60% of all loans for the coffee industry are likely to go unpaid, and this number stands at $370 million. Germany ranks third at 8.2%. While Germany does not have any coffee plantations, Germany re-exports a big part of the imported coffee to the EU, 75.9%, and the US, 15%. Between 2000 and 2011, Germany exported 17.7 million bags of coffee and re-exported 8.6 million bags. The value of re-exports by Germany have gone from $200 million to $1.5 billion. However, the coffee shades weren't always green in Germany. In 1977, a failed harvest in Brazil led to a shortage of coffee, driving up the prices. The East German government was forced to pay 5 times the sum for the same quantity of coffee and exchange weapons and trucks for coffee. While Switzerland's coffee exports make up 7.6% of total global exports, coffee exports only make up 0.61% of Switzerland's own exports. The reason behind its high export, however, lies elsewhere. In 2013, Switzerland processed 131 million kilograms of raw green coffee beans. Italy, which exported 42% less, processed 495 million kilos of raw beans. However, Switzerland's end product is pricier. By the gram, the coffee in Nestlé capsules costs around 10 times as much as coffee from a typical bag of roasted beans. In addition, Switzerland is much smaller and consumes a lot less of what it makes, leaving more to be exported. In 2005, Switzerland exported $130 million worth of coffee, and in 2016, Switzerland was exporting $2.06 billion of coffee. Colombia comes in at 5th at 7.5% of the total worldwide exports and exported a total of $2.7 billion worth of coffee in 2017. 51% of their exports went to North America, 31% went to Europe, and 16% went to Asia. However, Colombia is facing problems with their coffee production. Regional climate change associated with global warming has caused Colombian coffee production to decline since 2006 from 12 million bags to 9 million bags in 2010. Average temperatures have risen 1 degree Celsius between 1980 and 2010, and average precipitation has increased 25% in the last few years. These events have disrupted the specific climate requirements of the coffee Arabica bean. These 5 countries constitute 47.9% of all coffee exports. In fact, the top 15 countries account for 79% of coffee exports. Now, let us take a look at where this coffee is being exported and who is consuming it. Coffee imports were $30.4 billion in 2017. Speaking continentally, Europe was the biggest importer at 58% of worldwide coffee. North America follows with 22% and Asia comes third with 14%. Together, these three continents import 94% of the world's coffee. The world's biggest importer is the US at 20% of the coffee. In 2017, the US imported $6.03 billion worth of coffee. It imports 40% of its coffee from South America, 32% from North America, 15% from Asia, and 7.9% from Europe. The world's second biggest coffee importer is Germany at 11%. In 2017, Germany imported $3.5 billion worth of coffee. It imports 35% of its coffee from South America, 22% from Asia, and 21% from Europe. To look at which country consumes the most coffee, we will consider the coffee consumed per capita. Finland leads this list with 12 kilos per year per person. That equals 1,266 cups of coffee every year. That's almost 4 cups of coffee a day. Norway comes second with 9.9 kilograms per year per person, or 1,040 cups. Iceland finished third with 9 kilograms per person per year, at only 945 cups. The way we consume coffee has also changed over the decades. With the rise of coffee houses, lifestyles and economies that favor a one-time use, people consume coffee on the go and out of the house. In fact, in 2018, 4 out of 5 US dollars spent by consumers on coffee are attributed to out-of-home consumption. As coffee has taken a prime spot in many people's morning routine and has become an inseparable and an integral beverage next to water, there are many organizations that try to protect and uphold coffee's supply chain, coffee farmers, roasters, coffee quality, and more. Let us take a look at some of the most prominent coffee organizations. The Association of Coffee Producing Countries, or ACPC, was an international organization that attempted to influence global coffee prices, much like the way the OPEC influences oil prices. It was founded on the 24th of September in 1993 in Brazil. The members of the ACPC agreed to hold back a portion of their coffee exports until prices rose to a desirable level. However, the coffee-producing countries have been unable to work out a mechanism of control over coffee prices. Due to this, and as a result of financial problems, the ACPC dissolved itself in 2002. The International Coffee Organization was set up in 1963 under the auspices of the UN because of the great economic importance of coffee. It administers the International Coffee Agreement, or ICA, which is an important instrument for development cooperation. As of June 2018, its membership comprises 44 producing members and 6 importing members, one of which is the European Union. The International Coffee Council is the highest authority of the ICO and is composed of representatives of each member government. They meet twice every year to drink coffee. Just kidding. They discuss coffee matters, approve strategic documents, and consider the recommendation of advisory bodies and committees. The International Coffee Agreement is an international commodity agreement between coffee producing and consuming countries and is aimed at maintaining exporting countries' quotas and keeping coffee prices high and stable in the market. The ICA was signed in 1962 for a period of 5 years and was renegotiated 5 times since. After the withdrawal of the US from the ICA in June 2018, ICO member governments represent 98% of world coffee production and 67% of world consumption. The precursor to the ICA was the Inter-American Coffee Agreement, established during the Second World War. During the war, the European markets were closed off, the price of coffee was in decline, and the US feared that declining prices could drive Latin America towards Nazi or communist sympathies. In 1940, the US agreed to restrict its imports, and Latin American countries agreed to restrict production. This led to the price doubling by the end of 1941. The price of coffee kept rising until 1955 to 1957, when an equilibrium was reached. Producers sought to maintain the price, which led to the first international coffee agreement. When the indicator price set by the ICO fell below the target price, quotas were decreased. If it rose above, quotas were increased. This method succeeded in bringing stability to coffee prices. In 1989, consumers changed their taste towards milder and higher quality coffee, causing the ICO to fail to reach an agreement on new export quotas and the 1983 ICA to break down. Without an extended agreement, producing countries lost most of their influence on the international market. Thankfully, the agreement was reinstated in 1994. The Specialty Coffee Association is a non-profit trade organization for the specialty coffee industry. With members located in more than 40 countries, the SCA represents different segments of the specialty coffee industry, including producers, roasters, importers, exporters, and retailers. The Specialty Coffee Association also gave rise to the term specialty coffee. Unlike regular coffee, specialty coffees are grown at a higher elevation, are traceable, and processed carefully once harvested. Every step is monitored and understood to improve the quality. To qualify as specialty coffee, it must score over 80 points on a 100-point scale by the Specialty Coffee Association. Coffee-growing countries are now focusing on improving their quality at the farm level to improve cup scorings and thus profits. Specialty coffees are sold at a premium and bought by roasters and coffee traders directly. Fairtrade coffee is coffee that is certified as having been produced to Fairtrade standards by Fairtrade organizations. The goal is to achieve greater equity in international trade, to contribute to sustainable development, support producers and sustainable environmental farming practices, and prohibit child labor or forced labor. Coffee is also traded as a commodity, specifically a future. A future is a financial contract that obligates the buyer to purchase or the seller to sell an asset at a predetermined date and a predetermined price. Basically, a future sets a fixed price at which the good is sold and bought. This helps negate the price fluctuations and market uncertainty, which greatly benefits the farmers as they will have a stable income, the corporations because they know how much to pay, and the consumers as sudden increases in the price will not be passed on to them. It's a triple win situation. Global coffee futures involve two types of beans, Arabica and Robusta. Arabica coffee futures are called Coffee C futures or KC. The contract size for a single future is 37,500 pounds. Robusta coffee futures are called Robusta Coffee Futures, or RC. Their contract size is 10 tons. Coffee commodity trading is now done electronically. These commodities are traded on commodity markets and exchange-traded funds. The biggest and main one is called the New York Intercontinental Exchange, or the ICE. Coffee trades are mainly done through the New York Board of Trade, or as they are known now, the ICE Futures US. ICE is the designated futures market and exclusive global marketplace for Coffee C futures contracts. It's in these futures and options contracts where the global price for coffee is discovered on any given day. These commodity markets can be quite volatile. But what drives the price of coffee? Major price drivers include geopolitics, climate, discretionary income, transportation and oil prices, and health issues. Any disruption to the supply chain can cause price spikes. The majority of coffee-producing countries have histories of political instability. Political crises such as a leadership vacuum or corruption scandals can unnerve markets and create concerns about supply distributions. Coffee crops, especially Arabica, are highly sensitive to weather conditions. When the right combination of rainfall and sunshine doesn't materialize, supply becomes restrained and the price rises. Patterns in discretionary income and spending can play a significant role in moving prices. Trends in unemployment, average hourly earnings, a growing middle class in countries like India will all affect the demand for and thus the price of coffee. The transportation and oil prices will also affect coffee prices as coffee needs to be transported and those transportation costs will be covered in the coffee prices. So an increase in oil prices might spill over to the coffee prices. Health issues such as the benefits of drinking coffee, numerous antioxidants like vitamins, etc., and the side effects such as anxiety or sleep disorders can also influence the demand and thus the price for coffee. Another big price driver is what is known as enterprise trading. According to the International Coffee Organization, the big four coffee roasting companies, Kraft, P&G, Sara Lee, and Nestle, purchase approximately 50% of the coffee produced worldwide. Their trades can have a significant influence on the price of coffee. Last but not least, the US dollar is also an influencer. Such commodities are priced in US dollars, so a strong US dollar can potentially depress coffee prices, while a weak US dollar is usually good for prices. When discussing coffee, the big four ought to be mentioned as well. The big four buy about 50% of the world's produced coffee beans each year. They are Kraft, Nestle, Procter & Gamble or P&G, and Sara Lee. Kraft Foods is one of America's largest food conglomerates, owner of dozens of big-name brands. Their coffee brand, Gevalia, is a huge coffee roastery present in Scandinavia, the US, and many more regions. Nestle is a Swiss transnational food and drink company. It is one of the Fortune 500 companies and also owns dozens of brands. It is represented in the coffee market through its two daughter companies, Nescafé, a producer of coffee, and Nespresso, a producer of coffee capsules and coffee machines. Procter & Gamble used to own two coffee brands, Folgers and Millstone. However, in 2008, P&G sold off both their brands to the J.M. Smucker company. The Sara Lee Corporation used to own the coffee brands Merrill, Senseo, Mokone, and Dow Egberts, and many more. However, the corporation split in 2012, and the company that owns the beverages section is now called the D.E. Masters Blenders 1753. In 2014, D.E. Masters Blenders 1753 announced plans to merge with the coffee division of American food conglomerate Mondelez International. The Big Four have quite a lot of say in coffee prices and the market as such. Back in the day, they would blend small amounts of Robusta with Arabica to pare their purchasing costs. However, technological advances have allowed roasters to neutralize Robusta's harsh and unpleasant taste. To reduce costs further, the Big Four have significantly upped the percentage of Robusta in their blends, substituting it for Arabica they used to purchase from small farmers in Latin America and Africa. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. See you next time.